When you see a good move, look for a better one. You've probably heard this many times. Many of you, I'm sure, know that that was a quote by Lasker, the second world champion. There he is on the left. World champion for 27 years, no less. Check me out with my chess history research, which I spent ages researching that a minute ago online. But yeah, that was something that Lasker said. I'm sort of mildly amused by some of his other quotes as well. One that I particularly relate to is the hardest game to win in chess is a one position, which I quite liked. Anyway, away from his quotes and back to his actual chess. This position you see in front of you is an 1890 study by him. So there's a small section in Dvoretsky called Lasker's Idea, where we're just going to see two studies, although the second one incredibly ended up being a game involving Dvoretsky himself, which was kind of quite interesting. And they both involve the same idea, which an idea is being attributed to Lasker having come up with it in 1890. We've got a rook and one pawn versus a rook and one pawn, which ordinarily speaking is, probably a draw most of the time. But there's lots of tactics floating about, and I've said many times already on some previous videos that when we have pawns one square away from promotion, we should be on the lookout for deflection tactics, basically, to end up in a queen versus rook situation. So you could pause the video here if you wanted to. It's white to play. If it was black to play, just something like king a7, and this is just completely drawn. But it's white to play. There's only one winning move, which I guess is further confirmation that black to play would be a draw. What would you do here? And yeah, how are you going to win this? What's the winning plan? Because it's not difficult to find the first move as a suggestion, king b8, and realise straight away that black's in a lot of trouble. This rook is stopping this pawn from promoting. So if this pawn gets lost for this rook, or rather if the black rook gets lost for that pawn, then white's just going to have a king and rook versus a king. And if instead, if at any stage white can manage to lose their rook for this pawn, this black rook's going to be deflected away, and we're going to have queen versus rook, which indeed is the main tactic underpinning all the moves, including the beautiful finale to this one. So king b8, what does black do? They've got nothing really other than checks. Rook b2 check, king a8, and black says, fine, but I'm coming back and I'm attacking your c-pawn and I'm stopping you from promoting it. And king b8 would indeed go around in circles, but white's, whilst the kings are opposite, white's got this rook h6 check. King a5, king to b7, and this c8 promotion is being threatened because the king's guarding the c8 square, although the king doesn't have to guard the c8 square, as you'll see in a sec, for white to still have threats in this position, namely this deflection threat. So king b7, rook b2 check, king a7. Black's got nothing other than checks and to come back to the c file, but again the kings are opposite, so we can check the black king back another rank. Okay. This is called a systematic procedure, where you sort of follow the same thing to sort of keep moving down a rank. It becomes more complicated though, you'd think, because for example, white is no longer protecting the c8 square, so why can't black just do nothing? Well, it's not because white's threatening rook c5 and blocking the rook. He's absolutely not, because h1 equals queen. White might even be losing that position, to be honest. It's this deflection tactic. It's always there. And yeah, black doesn't have a similar thing going on because this white rook just stands behind the h-pawn. So all black can really do is carry on with the checks. Back to the c file, and we check the black king down another rank. Come back to b6 and defend the c-pawn. I suppose it's important that we do actually need to at least get back and defend the b-pawn. So I guess white achieves this by finishing off this systematic procedure by just one rank, because they couldn't go again, because they then have to go backwards. Rook b2 check, it's all black's got, because white's threatening this deflection. I mean, if you look round to the moves that black's got anyway, the rook's having to guard this and protect the h2 pawn, so the rook can't move. If the king comes back to the second rank, we would see the climax to this study a little bit early. So the only other move really is king b3. But now the king's blocking the b file, so white would just play king b7. Like I say, king a2 doesn't create that problem. Keep the b file clear for checks, but it would just more or less transpose, not completely transpose, but definitely transpose idea-wise into the thrilling climax of this study. Rook b2 check, king a5, rook back to the c file. The kings are opposite. Rook h3 check. The king has to go back to the second rank, and bosh, there it is, that final deflection. Really entertaining study, and yeah, you might not get that exact position in the game where you can use Lasker's exact idea to, you know, systematically shove the black king down the board until you can pin their rook to their king in a deflection tactic. Sure. But it's definitely, for me, beautiful studies like this, they hopefully turn something on in my brain that's aware of this sort of tactic and how it might occur, you know, and I've said already, especially when pawns are just one square away from promoting. Anyway, so that was Lasker's 1890 study. So we're talking about 135 years ago. The man on the left of the screen came up with that. Let's step forward to the modern day, 1947, and Keres came up with this same idea, but a bit more complicated study. It's only a bit more complicated because black's defense isn't finished once Lasker's idea has sort of done its damage. Wanted to play, pause the video, and come up with a plan of how you're going to win this. So this position, I mean, it might be an apocryphal story, I don't know, but this position occurred, well, this is a 1947 study by Keres, but then this position, apparently with colours reverse, then occurred in a game in 1973 involving Dvoretsky, where Dvoretsky was the attacking side. So he was black in that game, but colours were reversed, so he may as well have been white in the position you're looking at. And he also won it in a pretty elegant way, claiming in his book that he didn't know anything about the study. And it's clear from some of the text in the book that he obviously got together with Keres afterwards. Maybe Keres came to him and said, you do realise that position that you just converted was my study from 1947, who knows. Anyway, white played rook a3. White didn't play rook a3. The solution to this study is rook a3. White didn't play rook a3 in the 1973 game version. So rook a3, and the threat here is check and rook down to the second rank. And once you're attacking this pawn laterally, then black's in real trouble, because there's not going to be a sensible way to get the rooks out, get the black rook out and stop this white pawn promoting. We'll see that in the other variation later on. So black played king h4, or black plays king h4 rather, to guard against that rook h3 threat. But then we can come and cut the black king off on the fifth rank, so the black king can't get back. And black doesn't really have any moves other than to shuffle their king sideways. You know, if they try to keep their king on the h file, then we could go again, and the black king will be forced to come to g3. Or, I mean, again, we're going to start treading on the toes of the climax of this particular study. So the most obvious move for black to play without just giving up the a2 pawn immediately is king g4. But then you play king f7, and similar to the Lasker original study, black's in real trouble here. e8 queen is threatened, so rook f1 check has to be played. The king comes to g6, we see rook e1, and it's like white has to go back and defend their e-pawn. Any rook defense shenanigans, and white would have to be careful not to lose that with the deflection idea. Remember, this is a pawn that's about to promote. So rook a7 I think would be a draw looking at it, with after rook takes e7, I think, because white doesn't take the rook, white just takes this pawn. So it looks like rook a7 would just lead to a draw. Feel free to make a comment in the comments if you think I've said something daft there. But white's not going to do that. It's okay, the kings are opposite, but we're going for the sort of systematic procedure. Check. King back to h3, trying to keep the g file clear. White defends the pawn, king f6, rook f1 check, king g5. It doesn't really matter that the kings aren't opposite, because there is no I4 square for this king to run away to. So it's, you know, this check's just as effective at pushing this king backwards as it would have been if our king was on h5 as white. But black did play king h3 and keeping the g file clear. So after rook g1 check, white's kind of got to commit a little bit here, I guess. Because king h5, it's clear that the king can't get back to defend the pawn. But you're all right, because rook e1, check, king has to go back to the second rank, collect the a pawn with check, king f3, rook a7. And then we're going to come back with the king and defend the pawn. So that's the end of the sort of similar idea to Lasker's 1890 study, where we shove the black king down a rank at a time until we force it to the second rank. And in this case, it wasn't a deflection pin. It was just a simple takes pawn with check and then back up to e7. At this point, you think, well, it's just over now, right? It's not over, and white still has to take care. Rook e6 is an excellent defensive move, which gives white a bit of a headache, how they're getting their king back. So king g5, king e4. What's white going to do now? Pause the video again if you like. White to play. What should white do here? There are two winning moves. I mean, you're probably looking at it thinking there are only three sensible moves. Otherwise, you're moving a king somewhere daft because it's already in a pretty good place, and just, you know, that's the best place it can get to. It can't make any of those moves, so just leave it on g5. So you think of rook move, surely. So one of those three possible rook moves, I mean, I appreciate there are 10 possible rook moves, but one of those three sensible rook moves, staying on the 7th rank, is a move that throws away the win. And it's this one. Rook d7 throws away the win because black plays king e5 and white is just in zugzwang. There's just nothing that white can do now. This king's coming to d6. Once the rook moves, if the king moves, the king can come to f6. Your pawn's gone. It's a draw. White wanted this position with black to move, and that's why here rook b7, or indeed rook c7, was absolutely fine. So after king e5, then we play rook d7, and now it's black that's in zugzwang. You might be wondering, well, hang on, why doesn't black just try and break that then by king d5 now? Well, that allows the white king onto the f file. So yeah, rook b7, king e5, just still trying to shoulder that white king away. But rook d7, black is in zugzwang, king e4, and now we can come down with the rook. That's why we wanted the black king to move one rank that way. I mean, obviously black can't take the pawn because they lose their rook, but they can't even just do nothing particularly because we're threatening, I guess, rook e1 check, swap the rook, and then e8 equals queen. Any rook move is not very clever because it either allows this promotion or it allows the white king into f6. And black's about to lose their rook here or get it swapped, so the only sensible move really is king f3. We'd see rook f1 check. The black king has to come to the e file, otherwise I guess we'd go rook f7 and the king's coming to f5. Has to come down to e2, sorry, instead of g2. Anywhere higher on the e file, of course, we do a rook win or a rook swap as discussed. But here, even here still we can play rook f7. The black king desperately tries to get back to shoulder the white king away from the f5 square, but they can't, and it's gone. So yeah, that was a 1947 study But incredibly, like I say, Dvoretsky said he had this position himself in a 1973 game, unaware of the study, which is, I guess, sort of a good coincidence story. If you were looking at both those studies thinking, yeah, but that's just a study, it wouldn't happen in a game. Notice how I always give that hypothetical person a sort of a drony voice. So in the game, Rook a5 check was played, and Black goes King h4, and then Rook a3. So a sort of a similar sort of thing going on. If the Black, I mean obviously the Black Rook can't move because the a-pawn drops and it's over. We've got at least Lucena, if not an easier win straight away. So the Black King has to move. If the Black King steps to g4 trying to stop the White Rook's transfer to the second rank, then King f7, and we've transposed into the Keres study. So if instead of that Black plays King g5, then the Rook transfer to the second rank has been allowed. And now we're going to see why this is so useful. It's basically still the Black Rook is tied down to the defense of the a2 pawn, but we keep tying the Black Rook down to the defense of the a2 pawn, something like Rook h2, and Black puts their king on the e file because they need to try and get it out of the way. That's the only place it can go. Well, it could go to e4, but it doesn't want to go to e4. We'll see why in a sec. So Black had to play a king move. It had to be the e file because otherwise it's going to be an umbrella for White's king. And then you just play a waiting move on the h file. This is what Dvoretsky played in this 1973 game. So like I say, if we go that way, that's an umbrella for the White king. If we go that way, it's an umbrella for the White king. The Black king does not want to be an umbrella. The Black Rook can't move. It drops the a-pawn on the game straight away, fairly trivially. So the only way to not be an umbrella is King e4, which could have been played on the last move, of course. Last pause the video moment if you wanted to. Why does this refusal to be an umbrella not work? Bosh. Rook e2 check. I will get my umbrella. There's my umbrella. So I know I've lost my rook, but I'm getting a queen. That's going to become Rook versus Queen very, very shortly. Probably Black wants to get that Rook out of there straight away and just do their best on Rook versus Queen. And apparently Black, or indeed White, because it was colours reversed, resigned a few moves later. Yes, I hope everybody liked that. Two studies. Deflection, I guess, was the main theme. Something to be on the lookout for your games, in your games, especially when you've got pawns, just this c7 pawn in particular, one square away from promotion. So this was always on the cards as a tactic that the attacking side, in this case White, could use. But, I mean, even if you end up disagreeing, it's like, oh, that will never be relevant in any of my games. You're just sort of filling my head with rubbish that's not going to help my chess at all. Fine. They're still pretty cool studies, both of them. And so I hope you all enjoyed them.